Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into Naomi Klein's seminal work, No Logo.
Right, a book that landed right at the turn of the millennium, and it just fundamentally changed how so many of us see the world. The clothes we wear, the places we shop.
Everything. And that's really what we're here to analyze. Our core question is about this huge systemic shift. How did modern corporations move away from, the nuts and bolts of making things?
Of manufacturing products. Yeah.
Exactly. And pivot to something much more abstract, but also, so much more powerful, the manufacturing of meaning, of identity, of entire lifestyle narratives.
Yeah, we're definitely moving beyond just marketing here. Klein's book really dissects how the relentless expansion of brands into every public space.
Every single one.
Our schools, our cities, our culture, and even to sort of our sense of who we are. How that all constitutes this whole new architecture of corporate power.
It's a system designed for total cultural saturation. And that focus on systems is really the heart of our mission today.
Right. This isn't consumer advice.
No, not at all. Or a partisan take.
Right.
We're doing a systems-level analysis. We're going to look at the mechanics of globalization, what drives this cultural consolidation, and the resistance movements that this whole strategy kind of accidentally created.
By making corporations so visible.
By making them such potent, unmissable targets. So to really get the scope of No Logo, you have to understand the author and the context she was writing in. Naomi Klein, she was a journalist, a globalization critic.
And she was on the ground, right? This wasn't just academic.
Not at all. That's what gives the book its power. She was out there documenting the physical reality of this corporate expansion, these huge retail strategies, the massive sponsorships, and the corrosive effect all this had on actual public space.
And from Canada to the Philippines, as she documents.
Yeah. Exactly. And the book is really built on her firsthand observations of what she called this rising anti-corporate attitude that was brewing in the late 1990s.
So she was seeing the pushback firsthand.
She was. She wasn't just analyzing business plans from an office. She was talking to campus activists fighting Coke contracts following the bizarre, drawn-out McLibel trial in London.
Where McDonald's literally sued a couple of activists.
For years. And she was watching groups like Adbusters trying to, hijack billboards with their own counter messages.
And that late 90s context is so key because the book really captures the mood just before that whole anti-globalization movement just exploded.
It really did. It basically codified a disillusionment that was already there. It gave an intellectual framework for why these huge global events like the Battle of Seattle in 1999.
Where protesters shut down the WTO meetings.
Why that even happened, the book explained the rage.
So what was the trigger? What set all of this in motion from the corporate side?
It was what they internally called the brand crisis. And you can almost pinpoint it to a single day, Marlboro Friday in 1993.
Okay, what happened on Marlboro Friday?
It was the day Philip Morris announced they were slashing the price of Marlboro cigarettes by 20% to compete with generic brands. And the market just panicked. Wall Street saw it as proof that even the most powerful brands were losing their value.
So consumers were becoming brand blind.
Yeah.
They'd just buy the cheaper generic option.
Exactly. Especially with big box stores like Walmart offering their own private label stuff, it was an existential threat. If your product is just a commodity, why are you spending billions on advertising?
The whole model starts to fall apart.
It does. And that realization forced companies, your Nikes, your Disneys, your Starbucks, to pivot dramatically. They had to conclude that if the product itself was becoming worthless, the brand, the meaning, the idea had to become everything. It had to become transcendent.
And this happened to coincide with a couple of big global trends.
Perfectly. You had deregulation, which made it easier to move capital and production around the globe. And you had this intense push for globalization. So companies needed new markets.
This shifted their focus from the baby boomers
to this emerging, globally connected teen demographic. They use things like MTV and Nike's global ad campaigns to beam these powerful, consistent brand messages to young people everywhere.
So the book's analysis goes way beyond just economics. It's about culture, space.
All of it. Klein structures the whole thing around 4 key areas of impact. First is no space, that's the cultural occupation. Then no choice, which is about corporate censorship and consolidation.
And no jobs.
Which is the outsourcing and the casualization of labor. And finally, no logo, which is about the resistance movements that learned how to use the brand as a weapon against itself.
So if you had to boil it down, what's the central thesis here? In plain language.
In plain language, it's this. Modern corporations are increasingly in the business of selling abstract things. Identities, attitudes, lifestyles, the brainware of the brand.
And to do that, they have to do what?
They have to minimize their own risk, so they outsource all physical labor, and they completely shirk any real responsibility for actually making the goods that have their name on them.
And there's a one quote from Nike CEO Phil Knight that just perfectly sums it all up.
It's stunning, really. He basically announced that Nike was no longer a company focused on designing and making things.
He just said it out loud.
He did. He said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, "We've come around to saying that Nike is a marketing-oriented company, and the product is our most important marketing tool."
The product is a marketing tool, not, a shoe.
Exactly. The shoe is just the canvas for the idea. That one quote is the entire strategic pivot in a nutshell. It was a huge gamble, but it defined the next 30 years of business.
Okay, so let's unpack that core idea, this radical shift from being a product maker to a meaning generator.
Right. So the center of corporate power moves away from tangible assets, machinery, factories, real estate,
The stuff you can touch.
the stuff you can touch. And it migrates to the intangible asset, the logo, the swoosh, the golden arches, the name. The goal was for the company to completely transcend its own product.
By selling an idea instead.
An idea, a philosophy, something that connects with who you want to be. Klein just catalogs this brilliantly. Polaroid stops being a camera company. It sells social lubricant. IBM stops selling hardware. It sells solutions.
And we saw this everywhere. Diesel wasn't selling you denim jeans.
No, they were selling a style of life. They sold attitude, this sort of rugged independence. Even a brand like The Body Shop, which was seen as progressive.
Right, they were selling ethics.
They were selling a political philosophy, empowerment, environmentalism. The lotions and soaps were just, the proof that you bought into the ideology. The ideology was the real product.
But this kind of transcendence is only really possible because of the other side of the coin, which is the outsourcing revolution.
The Nike model, that's the operating system for this whole thing.
Mm.
See, traditionally, big companies were vertically integrated.
Meaning they owned everything, top to bottom.
They owned the factories, they employed the workers, they were responsible for making the thing. Think of how a company like Ford used to operate.
But once you decide the real value is in the logo, not the labor.
Then why would you own a factory? It's just a cost center. It's a liability. Why deal with payroll, healthcare, unions, when you can just dictate the terms from afar?
So they switched to the Nike prototype.
Completely. Zero ownership of manufacturing. Instead, they become these giant conceptual sourcing operations. They just send out the specs, the design, the price they're willing to pay.
To this huge global web of contractors.
Right. Mostly offshore in places with, let's say, very flexible labor laws. So Nike keeps all the intellectual property, all the marketing control, but it divests itself of all the human and environmental costs.
And this denial of responsibility, it wasn't a secret. They were really aggressive about it.
Oh, totally. There's that chilling example with Disney. They were criticized over these horrible working conditions in a factory in Haiti making their clothing.
And their response.
The spokesman just said, flat out, "We don't employ anyone in Haiti." He stressed that the factory was owned by a contractor, not Disney. The corporation explicitly flees the jobs business.
So that all that money, all that profit can be pumped back into branding and ads.
That's the engine. That's the economic foundation. But for the brand's power to work, you have to constantly reinforce it. And that leads to the second major part of the system, the total occupation of cultural and public space.
The brand has to be everywhere. It has to stop being like an unhip household name like Tide.
And it has to become an essential lifestyle accessory, a philosophy. Starbucks is the master of this. They took the simple act of buying coffee and turned it into this whole experiential environment.
And they built that reputation with almost no traditional advertising, right?
Almost none. The store itself was the ad, the space was the brand.
Which gives birth to the branded superstore.
Right. You take the huge scale of an old big box store like Walmart, but you infuse it with the intense branding and atmosphere of, like, a theme park.
Nike Town, with the indoor waterfalls and soundscapes.
It's a sensory experience. It's designed to be all-encompassing, to make you feel like you're literally stepping inside the world of the brand.
Barnes & Noble did a kind of softer version of this, didn't they?
They did, and it was pivotal. They created the bookstore superstore, and they meticulously crafted this old-world library feel. Comfy chairs, wood paneling, and the critical move, an in-source Starbucks.
The co-branding.
The co-branding. They became a super brand by creating this aspirational third place. It wasn't just a store anymore. It was a cultural destination.
But the occupation went even further. Klein talks about how brands crashed the schoolhouse doors.
Yeah, and this was mainly driven by a lack of public funding and the rising cost of technology that schools felt they had to have.
And the marketing consultants had a perfect argument for this.
It's a startlingly direct one. They basically said schools have to get with the program, they have to speak the language of kids, or they'll become daytime prisons. It equated corporate sponsorship with access to the future.
So it's framed as an educational necessity, not a commercial invasion.
Exactly. And so you had poorer school districts draining money from things like music or art to buy computers, which created a vacuum that corporations were all too happy to fill.
Which leads to things like exclusive vending deals.
Right, like a high school having a sign that says it's the official soft drink of Pepsi. And the contracts were explicit. School boards had to promise to maximize all sales opportunities for the products.
It went deeper than just soda machines, though. There was Channel 1.
Channel 1, which brought pre-packaged news programs with mandatory commercials right into the classroom. The brand managers weren't just fighting for an ad spot, they wanted their brands to become part of the curriculum.
Students writing essays about their favorite brand.
Or designing the next ad campaign. The school was becoming a focus group, a captive market.
And outside of school, you have this massive media integration, what the business world calls synergy.
Which in practice often just meant censorship and bias.
You have that leaked Heineken memo.
Oh, that memo is incredible. An executive just berating the producers of a youth culture show for not Heinekenizing it enough, demanding more shots of the beer in the hands of cool kids.
And complaining about the demographics of the audience?
Complaining there were too high a proportion of Negroes in the audience to fit the brand's target. It just shows the explicit heavy hand of sponsorship dictating the content.
And we saw with the Olympics, too. CBS reporters wearing Nike gear.
Yeah, and the reporter Roberta Baskin, who had broken a story about Nike labor abuses, alleged that the network wouldn't let her run a follow-up story because of the Nike sponsorship deal.
Which CBS denied, of course.
Of course, but they did pull the logos off the news reporters halfway through the games, which tells you the pressure was real.
And then the internet comes along,
Yeah.
and marketers see it as nirvana.
The ultimate ad-free ad, because online, you could blur the lines so much more aggressively. Sites like Parent Soup were created by content developers, specifically for clients like Fisher-Price.
So the content was engineered from the start to sell a product.
From the very beginning, the site offers parent advice, but the advice always concludes that the solution to your problem is surprise. A Fisher-Price toy or a Polaroid camera. The editorial wall is just gone.
And all of this constant pervasive presence, this drive for total occupation, it creates the core contradiction.
The one that fuels the resistance. It's the huge, obscene gap between the shiny brand image and the degraded reality of how the stuff is actually made.
What Klein calls the brand boomerang.
Exactly. This is where it gets really dark. The outsourcing funnels all this production into what she calls the branding broom closet. The export processing zones, or EPZs.
These are basically pockets of pure industry.
Like Cavite in the Philippines.
Yeah.
But they're essentially non-territory. They're set up by governments to attract foreign investment by offering huge incentives.
Tax holidays, no customs duties.
And most importantly, exemptions from local labor laws. They're run like military camps.
And the big brands just dictate a price for a shoe or a shirt that's so low
That the contractor has to squeeze labor costs to the absolute bone. The burdensome logistics of, human decency are just shunted onto the middleman.
And the stories from the workers are they're horrifyingly uniform.
Crushing. They're mostly young women working 12, 16-hour days for wages below subsistence. The jobs are transient. They're hired through temp agencies, so they never get benefits or permanent status. It's the definition of casualized labor.
The details are what stick with you. The IBM worker in Manila who assembles computers but says, we don't know how to operate computers.
Or the seamstresses for Gap and guests having to urinate in plastic bags under their machines because the bathrooms are padlocked except for short monitored breaks.
It's just that of the core trauma of the system.
It is, and it's the brand boomerang. On one side, you have the glamorous message, the $150 Air Jordans telling kids to just do it, embodying greatness.
And on the other side?
The other side is the reality that the shoe cost maybe $5 to make by a worker in Indonesia earning $2 a day.
And that gap, that huge, easily understood disparity between the promise and the reality.
That's what makes these super brands so incredibly vulnerable. They spent billions to make the swoosh a universal symbol, and in doing so, they created the perfect, globally recognized metaphor for injustice. So now that we have that central contradiction, let's sort of map the architecture of this whole logo web. How does this system actually function?
It's all about actors, incentives, and these powerful feedback loops, right?
Exactly. On the supply side, your main actors are the global corporations. And their incentive is simple: total brand awareness, maximum visibility, constant expansion.
The idea that if you weren't everywhere, you were nowhere.
That's the philosophy. Then you have the advertisers and the cool hunters. They're the brand stewards.
Their job is to basically go out and find the next cool thing.
It's almost anthropological. They race back to high schools, to subcultures, to find the next attitude, isolate it, and then repackage it and sell it back to the very kids they took it from.
And governments and media conglomerates are the enablers in this system.
Key enablers. Governments create the EPZs, luring capital. Media companies emerge and are driven by the need for synergy, for cross-promotion. Disney owns ABC, Time Warner owns Turner. The incentive is access to capital and market share.
And at the bottom, you have workers driven by economic necessity and consumers driven by what? The illusion of empowerment.
That's a huge part of it, and that leads to the system's core narratives of control. Marketers in the 90s were brilliant at co-opting identity politics. They weren't selling products, they were selling choice as empowerment.
So you had lesbian chic in fashion, Benetton using diversity in its ads.
Exactly. The narrative was that the way to make the world better was through representation, through pop culture, through buying the right things to signal your values.
So the focus turns inward to your own identity instead of outward at the structures of power.
Precisely. And Klein's critique here is severe. She argues this conflation of personal politics with economic reality made issues like class and corporate power just fall off the mainstream agenda.
We were rearranging the furniture while the house burned down.
That's the line, focusing on cultural mirrors instead of who owns the factory.
And there's another deep contradiction in the narrative, isn't there? Brands using the language of rebellion.
Oh, constantly. They're hip, disruptive, they have attitude, but at the same time, they seek absolute rigid control over their own brand and their market.
Like Bill Gates claiming his products empower people.
While Microsoft was aggressively locking up the market and crushing any competition to restrict consumer choice.
So how do these feedback loops work? How does the system reinforce itself?
Branding leads to consumption, which generates profit that gets funneled back into more cultural occupation. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. Michael J. Wolff called it full integration,
And the ultimate expression of this loop is the fully branded lifestyle experience.
where the brand becomes the entire environment. And the perfect, if chilling, example is Disney's Town, Celebration, Florida.
Which was marketed as this authentic, pre-Disneyfied American town.
An authenticity bunker, designed to look like the very thing their marketing was supposedly destroying. Picket fences, town squares.
But it's all fake. It's all controlled.
Every single detail is subject to the rigid control of a Disney-appointed homeowners association. It's private power masquerading as public space. They aren't just selling you a t-shirt, they're selling you the entire infrastructure of your life.
And this demand for total visibility, the logo everywhere, it becomes a tool for control, for censorship.
A powerful silent one. Look at retail domination. In the late 90s, Walmart and the big chains controlled over half of all U.S. newsstand sales.
Which gives them the power to decide what gets sold.
They could just reject magazines for covers they thought were too risque or had articles on topics they didn't like. It's de facto censorship.
And it extended to the music industry. Walmart and Kmart forced artists to sanitize their work.
Famously, Nirvana, one of the biggest bands in the world, and they were forced to change the artwork for In Utero and rename the song Rape Me to Waif Me just to get it stocked in Walmart.
So this isn't government censorship. This is private corporations enforcing a very specific cultural norm on a global scale.
And Blockbuster Video was maybe the most powerful gatekeeper of all in the home video market,
Because they refuse to carry any NC-17 rated films.
which led to this insane industry practice where studios, wanting that massive blockbuster revenue, started preemptively cutting two versions of their movies, one for theaters and a sanitized one just for Blockbuster.
The content was compromised before a single person even saw the film.
Entirely driven by the power of one retailer. And this desire for smooth, unobstructed access goes global, leading to what Klein called the China chill.
This is when corporate interests start setting the political agenda.
When their desire to access huge markets, like China's, leads them to proactively self-censor.
The Rupert Murdoch example is the classic one.
Dropping BBC World Service news from his Star TV satellite service after Beijing complained about its critical coverage of China. Murdoch needed the Chinese government's goodwill. The message was clear. Criticism costs money.
Disney learned that lesson too with their film Kundun.
A film about the Dalai Lama. Beijing immediately banned all Disney films for 2 years.
And Disney only got back in their good graces after they released Mulan.
A very China-friendly story of Chinese heroism. An obvious olive branch, which, surprise, surprise, paved the way for, talks about a $2 billion Disney theme park in Hong Kong.
So much for corporations bringing the torch of freedom to authoritarian regimes.
That rhetoric just collapsed. In practice, they carried the torch of economic self-interest, and the profit motive beat the freedom narrative every single time.
So if we connect that system Klein uncovered back then to what's happening today, the patterns are, well, they're everywhere. That model of divesting responsibility for labor.
It's the gig economy. It's the exact same logic.
The casualization of labor is now universal.
It perfectly mirrors that factory divestment model, but it's applied to the service and knowledge sectors here at home.
Yeah.
You're hired as a freelancer, a contractor, part of the free agent nation.
But the key feature is impermanence, no job security.
None. And it destabilizes everyone, from an office temp to a high-tech coder. It's the flight from jobs story, but applied to white-collar work. The corporation outsources hiring, payroll, benefits.
They focus on the brand and the service,
Yeah.
and someone else manages the disposable labor.
And this precarity, it has a clear class dimension. It's great for the top 20%, the temp CFOs who can hop from job to job for more money.
But for everyone else,
It pushes the most vulnerable into poverty. Klein cited a study showing 52% of women in non-standard work were earning poverty-level wages. These aren't empowered free agents, they're just vulnerable.
and this severing of the link between huge corporate profits and stable jobs, that created a disillusionment that's still with us. You saw it in '97 UPS workers strike.
That strike was so telling. The public, which is usually skeptical of unions, overwhelmingly sided with the workers.
Why?
Because UPS was posting record profits, billions. The public just intuitively understood that there was no good economic reason to keep all those long-term workers as part-time without benefits.
They were a lightning rod for this broader rage against the new economy model.
A model of high profits completely decoupled from stable jobs. And that is still a core crisis driving discontent in the gig economy today.
And what about public space? The corporate presence in schools is still a huge issue.
It continues, absolutely. And it's often justified with the same rhetoric we heard in the 90s. Kids are savvy enough to know the difference between education and marketing.
Which is a justification that allows branding to become the curriculum.
Right. And the privatization of space in general is a critical theme from No Logo that's only accelerated when public squares, or the virtual versions of them, are enclosed.
The opportunity for free speech just shrinks.
Dramatically. Think of early AOL. It acted like a branded media empire, controlling the community discussions of its subscribers, even though people thought of it as a neutral utility like the phone company.
And in physical space, those boundaries get enforced, sometimes violently.
The example of the Toronto Jazz Festival is perfect. It was sponsored by a tobacco company, Du Maurier. Anti-tobacco activists tried to hand out leaflets in Nathan Phillips Square.
Which is public land, the city's town square.
But because the festival was sponsored, the space was temporarily considered the private property of the tobacco company. The activists were forcibly removed.
Which really illustrates the political stakes here.
Yeah.
If our opportunities to express ourselves, to protest, are constantly being enclosed by corporate landlords, then what good is the freedom?
It brings you right back to Noam Chomsky's point that freedom without opportunity is a devil's gift.
But there's a flip side to this. The brands themselves, by being so everywhere, they accidentally created a tool for resistance.
They did. Logos became the international language. An activist in Manila and an activist in London immediately understand what a Nike shoe represents. The web of logos allows them to trade information globally.
And the most aggressive brands, Nike, Shell, McDonald's, they become the biggest targets.
Precisely because they're such powerful, simple metaphors for the whole system. The outrage over a $150 sneaker made by a worker earning $2 a day is immediate, it's emotional, it's easier to grasp than a 300-page trade agreement.
And you can use that brand as a lever
The Daishowa boycott in Canada is an amazing example. Daishowa was a paper company logging on contested indigenous land, but they were unbranded, so it was hard to run a consumer boycott.
So what did the activists do?
They ran a secondary boycott. They targeted Daishowa's big branded clients companies like Pizza Pizza and Roots Clothing that use their paper products.
And those brands couldn't afford the bad press.
Couldn't afford the brand boomerang. They were forced to drop Daishowa, which put enough financial pressure on them that they had to agree to stay off the disputed land. It shows that even a faceless corporation is vulnerable if its supply chain connects back to a consumer-facing brand.
So if we situate no logo in a broader framework, it really reveals this fundamental dilemma of brand-based politics. Is it a real movement for change, or does it just become an ethical shopping exercise?
That's the core risk, the push for things like no sweat labels, which was modeled on the dolphin-safe tuna stamp.
It seems like a good idea.
On the surface, yes, but it suggests that huge structural problems like labor abuse can be solved through individual consumer choices in the marketplace.
Instead of through, laws.
Yeah.
Legally binding codes and democratic governance.
Right. And even if consumers are aware, the power dynamics don't just vanish. The ultimate goal of branding, its greatest achievement, is when it's just accepted as culture.
When an Absolute Vodka ad is just seen as art.
Exactly. And that cultural acceptance is a great way to mask the underlying concentration of ownership and the ugly political decisions.
Like Shell collaborating with repressive governments in Nigeria.
While trying to rebrand itself with new age rhetoric about a new ethical paradigm, the branding is political cover for the extraction.
So because traditional politics often couldn't touch these multinational corporations, the resistance had to become cultural, symbolic.
It had to disrupt the meaning-making machine itself, and a key tactic was culture jamming.
Which is basically cultural jujitsu.
A perfect description. You use the momentum and the money of your enemy's own branding against them. Ad busters would hack into a corporation's own language to send a countermessage.
That Teamsters billboard is a great example.
The Miller Too Cold ad campaign. The Teamsters just took the same design and replaced the 2 beer bottles with 2 frozen workers, and the tagline became, "Too cold, Miller canned 88 St. Louis workers."
So they're forcing Miller to foot the bill for its own subversion.
Because Miller already paid billions to make that logo recognizable, the jammers believe that if the commercial noise is so loud it drowns everything else out, you have to fight back in that same sphere.
And then there's the more physically defiant form of resistance, reclaim the streets.
Or RTS. This came out of England, a mix of rave culture and political rage against laws that were criminalizing spontaneous street gatherings.
So they would just take over the streets.
Spontaneously, but in a highly organized way. They'd hijack major intersections and turn them into what they called a temporary autonomous zone,
A space free from corporate or state control.
asserting that people can make their own fun, their own culture, without needing a sponsor or a permit. They would say things like, "We're not blocking traffic, we are the traffic."
And these actions went global.
They coordinated against major summits in the late 90s with the slogan, "The resistance will be as transnational as capital."
And the genius of these movements was recognizing that since commercialism had kind of overpowered all the old institutions.
Religion, politics, schools,
Yep.
it made corporations the natural, singular target for all this free-floating political rage.
So when you step back, what does no logo help us see differently about our world now? It definitely reframes the crisis.
I think so. The corporate drive for this transcendent brand meaning led them to willingly cut ties with production, with stable jobs. And in doing that, they accidentally lost the very loyalty from workers and consumers that used to protect them from this kind of citizen outrage.
And the book really highlights the deep, almost desperate need for designer gear, for branded stuff. It shows how consumption gets framed as self-expression.
Especially for disadvantaged youth. A $150 pair of Nikes becomes a substitute for self-esteem or for real political power. The brand sells you a talisman of success, while the company is taking the actual manufacturing jobs out of your community.
Which brings up these huge questions of agency and democracy that are more relevant than ever. If corporate interests are setting so much of the global agenda, how do citizens find meaningful ways to express themselves and govern their own lives?
It leads you to that chilling conclusion, circling back to Chomsky. Freedom without opportunity is a devil's gift. If the public sphere is constantly being enclosed and commercialized, if our ability to assemble and protest is limited by corporate ownership,
Then true agency becomes almost impossible. You're left with this political paralysis in the face of these huge, abstract global systems.
But paradoxically, the brand web itself has become this incredible popular education tool.
How so?
Because the methods of a company like Nike or Shell are so visible, the disparity between their empowering image and their degrading reality is so huge and tangible.
It provides a clarity that a complex economic treaty never could.
You see it instantly. And the way out of that labyrinth of corporate power has to come from citizens. It means demanding real political solutions that are accountable to people, not just accepting these non-binding corporate codes of conduct or thinking that ethical shopping alone is going to fix it.
This deep dive was based on the book No Logo by Naomi Klein.
We strongly encourage you to read the book yourself, support the author, or check your local library.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy systems-level analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.